Welcome to the Hour of the Matriarch. The Hour of the Matriarch is a ministry unifying matriarchs and patriarchs from diverse ethnicity to restore the building blocks of family union around the globe within the 7 mountains of influence via Christ consciousness. Those 7 mountains of influence are family, religion, government, education, business, media, and arts and entertainment. THOTM's speaker for the hour is Peter Fahnestock with the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service. He is their resource soil scientist. He will be eruditing us on today via their federal system in your preparation for research for land. Peter, take it away.
Hi, Deborah. Thank you so much for that introduction. As Deborah said, I'm a resource soil scientist. I'm not the only one. There's lots of us throughout the country. I happen to be in the West Coast, but wherever you are in the United States, you'll be able to find one of my counterparts with the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service. We have local offices all over the country. Sometimes they're on a county by county basis, and in some of the smaller states or more less populated states, we might combine a couple or 2 or 3 counties together and have an office that serves more than one county. But we're not very far away, and we do a number of things other than just what I do. I provide soils information, or I help interpret soils information. We have other people that actually make the soil surveys that actually collect the data, about which we're going to be sharing a little bit today, and give you a little bit of information on what that means and what that data is and where you can find it and actually what you can do with it. But there's also other folks that actually administer congressionally mandated farm programs. So we're actually a people-oriented agency, and we have a lot of things that we do with conservation. We'd like to help out landowners, not just farmers, but also landowners. Some of these people don't even consider themselves farmers, but they want to use the soil. They want to do something with the soil, or with livestock, or with the range, or something like that. And we have programs that we can help, sometimes even cost share with that. Technical assistance like what I do, or even cost sharing on programs. So if you have any interest, high tunnels is a very hot topic, especially with a lot of smaller growers, people who don't consider themselves to be commercial agricultural people, but a lot of high tunnels. Even if you have a couple acres, maybe you can put a high tunnel on there. And I know our agency does a lot of assistance with folks who want to try to use the land. Maybe they're in a spot where they have winter comes early, up in the northern states. Or maybe you're in a place where it gets really hot and you need some protection, but a high tunnel often works really well for that. Well, our agency is doing a lot of work with that. So that seems like something that you might be interested in. I mean, that's just one example that you could certainly contact the Natural Resources Conservation Service that's close to you, their office, and have a chat about that. However, that's not really what Deborah wanted me to talk about today, but I felt that might be a nice introduction. Just people aren't always aware of that, and since this is since I'm doing this on your tax dollars, it seems logical that I should try to give you a little bit more a value back on that by letting you know what you might not know about what's available to you, or what some of your tax dollars, or tax pennies in this case, would be paying for. So we want to get into a program. It's a web program called Web Soil Survey. And I want to show you what that survey can do, or what that program can do. But I think before I do that, Deborah and I had a conversation before the show here, and it seemed like a good thing to do, just to sort of set the stage and just discuss. It probably won't be as brief as maybe some of you will like, if you don't like the sound of my voice, because I do like to talk. But we thought maybe what we should do is just provide a little introduction to what exactly is soil. So I think that you can see there on your screen now, if you're watching this, you can see a little blurb there, a little slide that says, what is soil? And so I'm actually taking this from a presentation. This is not going to be as polished as perhaps you might expect. I'm going to jump around a little bit because there's a lot of stuff in this presentation that I'd love to get into because I do like to teach, but I think we're not going to do that. But I wanted to pull a few slides out here that I thought were relevant. And what I kind of wanted to do for those of you who really are not really comfortable with soil terminology, or maybe who don't even know what we're talking about, I wanted to go ahead and just discuss a little bit about soil. So this first slide here, what is soil? I give you a couple definitions, and of course the first one is actually from Webster, and that is the definition that says 1 second here, 1 second. I'm sorry about this. I get just, there's other things always trying to demand your time. So let's look at Webster's definition first of all. That's the upper layer of earth that may be dug or plowed. That's a pretty general definition that I'll probably everybody could agree with. We know soil and earth probably the same thing. Now we get into some of the scientists. Actually, there's a textbook that I actually teach out of, and you can see that whole definition really gets, it's the same saying pretty much the same thing. But there's a whole bunch of more stuff in there. And I think that's what we need to understand. And I put that definition out there, and I'll read it. A dynamic natural body composed of mineral and organic solids, gases, liquids, living organisms, which can serve as a medium for plant growth. So you can kind of see that if you just look at that one sentence there is a whole bunch of stuff going on inside that. There's all kinds of stuff, and that's kind of, without getting into all those things, and you'd have to take a class to really hit all those adequately. But I wanted you to sort of understand that when we're looking at soil, we're talking about something that's a lot more than just the upper layer of earth that may be dug or plowed. There's a lot of stuff going on there. It's an entire world, and I'm going to zip through here and kind of sort of show you that. This is just some more definitions. I got a few more things going on through here. As I said, I'm going to zip through this kind of quickly. I don't want to give you the whole presentation, but let's look at this. Now, another term, without getting into the terminology, it sounds, big words. Pedosphere. Soil is often used, the term ped is often associated with soil. I guess has to do with Latin and all the things, science loves those Latin names. But what I wanted to show here is that when we talk about the soil as being a dynamic natural body and it being sort of almost like an organism in and of itself, I wanted to kind of show you how that sort of interrelates with some of the other things that we may be familiar with. For instance, we have rock, air, water, and life. And that's kind of maybe goes along a little bit with some of your own philosophies about what's going on in the world. But we have lithosphere, that'd be the rock layer or the rock world. We have air, the atmosphere, we're all familiar with that, water, the hydrosphere, oceans, lakes, etc. And then we have life, the biosphere. Now, you can kind of see that this is not a great picture, but you can kind of see, I should have a pointer up here, but here's the atmosphere where we breathe. Here's the biosphere. Here's minerals, lithosphere. This is rocks, clays, everything geology-wise. And here's water. And you can kind of see that right in the middle here is soil. And soil touches on all of those. So it's, in one sense, soil kind of binds all those things together. It kind of is the link between the atmosphere and the lithosphere, the biosphere and the hydrosphere, because it has components of each one of those in itself. So if you stop and think about that just for a second, without worrying about the other graphics, just look at these little 5 circles up here. I think that's kind of, you kind of see what we're talking about there. You can kind of see the importance of soil on all the other things that sort of make up our world or make up life, if you will. Okay, so I'm a fast talker. I can even go faster than this, but I've got to be careful I don't go too quick. I wanted just to talk a little bit about some general properties of soil, because a lot of times, I skipped past a slide earlier that said a homeowner's definition of soil, and it's dirt. All right, so they don't even call it soil. We think about soil and dirt as being the same thing, but well, actually they're not. Dirt is actually soil where we don't want it. If it's on your hands before lunch, you definitely it's soil out of place. We don't want dirt on our hands if we're going to have lunch, right? And track it into the house on your shoes, it becomes dirt. When it's outside in the yard, it's soil. So dirt's just really soil where out of place or where we don't want it. So dirt and soil are not exactly the same things, even though they are the same things. You see where I'm going with that. So let's talk about just a couple of general properties of soil, because I think it's kind of important to understand. Well, if we make all this big deal about the pedosphere, what exactly are we talking about? What is soil? If it's not dirt, what is it? So let's just go there quickly, and we'll get everybody on the same page. So this is my introduction, just to kind of like set the stage so that we can actually begin to look at Web Soil Survey and see how we can use those tools. Okay, so I'm going to put these things out here. Don't worry about all the stuff. Just sort of listen to me, and then just sort of get the big picture there. Don't worry about the smaller bullets. What is soil? Approximately, it's half solids and half pore space. That means there's half of it's air and half of it's the other stuff, the stuff that we think of as maybe as being the dirt part. But within the solids, and this is going to be important, within those solids, the half of the soil that's solids, we have what we call sand, silt, and clay. Now, you've all heard of sand, you've all heard of silt and clay, but you maybe didn't really think of them as being the three components that make up the solid part of soil. Okay, but they are. Now, I give you some size fractions there, and basically sand is big and clay is really, really small. Sand you can see with your eyes, silt and clay you can't. But it's a lot more than just size. It's a lot more than that. Okay, we also have in the soil, we have soil water. Remember we talked about the hydrosphere? We call that soil solution. Don't worry about it. But but the reason it's solution, just like if you like to drink sweet tea or anything like that, how does sweet tea become sweet? Well, you can't just put water and sugar in it because it's not sweet. You don't have the tea part. You got to have tea, and whatever makes up tea, you got to have water, and you got to have sugar. But you don't see those things as distinct in your sweet tea. You see them as a solution. And it's the same thing when you add water to the soil. Whatever's in the soil or whatever gets added to the soil gets dissolved, goes into solution in the water and the soil. And that's how your nutrients or your bad stuff actually gets to where the roots are, actually moves down through that soil itself. Because remember, it's not all solids. There's empty space in there. There's air in there as well. That's where the water moves through. It can't move through the solid stuff, has to move through the spaces between the solid stuff. And it takes whatever is dissolved in it and it moves it down through there. That's how your roots the roots of your plants actually get the nutrients they need and whatever else you might be feeding them. Now, I put a lot of other stuff there. I don't know that that's really what we want to get into right now. You can look at that and read through it, but I don't want to really spend a whole lot of time on it because I know I'll get sidetracked, and then we'll be 2 hours from now. You guys will all have gone to sleep, and we'll still be on like the second or third slide, and we won't really have accomplished what I want to get. So when we look at the soil, if we dug a hole in the ground and we were looking at it, we would actually see layers. They're not always as obvious as they are in other places, but those layers are called horizons. And the horizons together are called the profile. So I make another statement there. So you have soils that have layers. All soils will have layers, and all those layers together, individual layers we call horizons. And if we dug a hole and we went down to, let's just say we dug a hole 4 foot deep, we'd have several horizons or layers in there. And those horizons or layers, we would collectively call them the soil profile. Okay. Now that's important too. Now my statement down here says soils vary across the landscape, sometimes over very short distances. That's important to understand. That's important to understand. Just like we know if we go outside and your land and it's a natural landscape and it's undulating, it's going up and down, or you have a hill in the backyard and you have the bottom of the hill and the top of the hill and the side of the hill. Then you got the lawn that goes up to the hill. All those are going to be different. They're all going to be different soils. Now, we're not going to get into why those are different, but trust me, the formation of soils follows a very, very, very distinct and logical process. There's 5 soil forming factors, and all soils follow those factors in their formation. The overriding factor on soil development, I'll just give you this, is time. So the 5th factor is time. So the more time goes by that a soil has a chance to have the other 4 soil forming factors act on it, the more that soil will change. But it changes according to a very logical and understandable and repeatable pattern. So when we understand that, then we can understand why we have horizons, because the more that we have horizons is because the soil forming factors allow changes in the soil profile. They allow, and time actually allows more of those changes to occur. So we get distinctions in the layers. We get distinctions in soils. A soil that maybe was a whole bunch of material that was lifted up by a flood and dumped from point A to point B, that's it's got no time on it. It's just a bunch of earth material. But if we let the soil forming factors plus time act on that pile of earthy material, and we came back in 1,000 years, we would say we've got some distinctions going on. Now we might see some layers. If we came after the floodwaters went down and we dug into that and we went down 6 feet, we probably wouldn't see anything different at all because it's all just been mixed up by the flood and taken from point A to point B. But if we came back and no more flooding, came back in 1,000 years and looked at it, we'd have, life would have continued for 1,000 years, and that soil would have begun to differentiate into different layers or horizons. And again, here's an important thing to understand. Soils form from the top down. They form from the top down. So and I'm going to show you a slide that's going to prove this. So when we look at diversity in soils, what are we most concerned with? We're most concerned with what's happened at the surface. How has that upper layer been managed? Has it been disturbed? So since we know that soils form from the top down, we know that the most diversity, where most of everything is going to be happening, is going to be closer to the surface. So that's actually an important, and don't think too much about it, just sort of accept it and say, okay, well, that kind of makes sense. I mean, if you were, I'm trying to think, if you were an animal that was living on the surface, would you burrow down to 4 feet before you explored what was happening up there? Probably not. Why would you go down 4 feet when you had everything you needed, organic matter, roots, other insects, whatever you might be, right up there at the surface? You would live that's where your community would be, because that's where all your needs would be met. They wouldn't be met down there because there ain't nothing down there. That's kind of the logic of it. So soils form from the top down, and they can vary over short distances. A corollary statement to that is, because they vary across the landscape, and because there's this soil forming factors, which I'm not talking about, but time is the overriding factor, and again, makes the soils differentiates them. It makes sense that soils will vary greatly in their suitability for various land uses, because if there's 5 factors that act on them, and one of them is time, if a shorter amount of time is acted on the exact same material, then you're going to have a different soil at 500 years or 100 years than you would at, say, 1,000 years or 2,000 years or 10,000 years. You see what I mean? Because the same material has had more time acting on it. There's going to be more differentiations, and more things have happened. More plants have lived, more plants have died. Climate is stabilized, water's moved through it. That soil solution we talked about has had a chance to act, and et cetera, et cetera. So soils are going to vary greatly in their suitability for various land uses. Now, some of you might be thinking at this point, gosh, it sounds like there's a lot more than I thought about in all this soil stuff. So what do I got to do? I got to take a class before I can actually understand soils? No, you don't. I mean, you might be interested and you might want to do that, but what you just need to do is you need to understand that soil is more than dirt. That's what we're trying to set right here. Soil is more than dirt, and soil is actually something that we need to manage, we need to take care of, et cetera, et cetera. But and Deborah mentioned that if folks are going to want to go out and say, look for soil or look for suitable soil for a purpose, maybe to live on or to grow or to use as a growing medium, we need to understand these properties. We can find all the information in the web soil survey, but if we don't really know what we're looking for, and we don't understand what we find when we find it, it's okay to navigate the site and say, oh yeah, I found this. But if we don't really understand what it means or what we're actually getting, then it's kind of a waste. So that's the reason for taking some time on this. This is a black and white picture, and it's cruddy in one way because it's black and white. But what I want you to look at is I want you to look at that picture of those several fields there in the very middle. You can see that the land around it looks pretty natural. It looks like there's kind of a river coming in from the left, and it's kind of going around the bottom of the picture and going out on the right-hand side. But you can see in the fields, there's light areas and there's dark areas. Now that river has probably moved over time, but you can also see on the land that hasn't been turned into agriculture, you can see some areas have a lot of trees and some areas have less trees. Why do you think that might be? Now I'm speculating myself because I don't really know. I didn't take this picture, but I don't even know where it is. I can guess. It looks like it's probably someplace out west, but I'm going to say I know exactly what's going on there. There's different land types there. So even though they might be farming a field, there's differences within the soils in that field. And we can see that in the field part for sure, we can see lighter areas and we can see darker areas. I'm going to guess those lighter areas are probably a little bit higher on the landscape. They're a little bit more convex, let's just say. And they've probably had that upper material washed away, either blown away by the wind or washed away by water. So maybe not as fertile. And I'll bet anything if we put a crop on that, the same, it looks like they have, because it looks like it's all being cropped as one field. I'm going to guess that they're going to be able to tell this part of the field does better than that part of the field as far as yields, no matter what it is that they're growing. So I don't have a soil survey on this because I don't know where it is, but I'll show you, we'll be able to make a determination. Let's say you wanted to buy that piece of property and you want to know, well, what kind of soils are in there? And it does look different, but what are those differences? The soil survey can help you make those decisions. When you're looking at just a photograph, just like this, it can help you decide, is that something that I want to pick up? Is that a good price? Is that actually the kind of soil that I think I want? Just because somebody put a tractor in and used it doesn't mean that they've managed it well. It doesn't mean that that's what it looked like, before they broke it out and first started planting it. We need to understand those things. And so that's kind of what I hope to do with this presentation on that. So you can see just that picture there. There's all kinds of different things going on. Even again, as I said, there's areas that look like they have really good trees, or it looks like maybe junipers or something like that. And then there's areas that don't. And you could say, well, it could be any number of things. Out west, we talk about fire a lot. Well, it looks kind of natural to me, but sure, I would say it could be fire, but it also could be the fact that we've got some soils that are deeper and maybe more fertile than others. And if the water is the same, where the tree's going to grow better, where the conditions are better. So they might like that. So even if we were to take some of that area and purchase some of that area that isn't in farm, let's just say we bought the piece next to it, we could actually look at that, the one with the road kind of going right through it with the tree. Let me see if I can do my mouse on it. Yeah, we got the road right here. Can you see that, Deborah? Is that actually showing up by mouse? I could probably put a pointer. See, this looks
Yes,
like this looks pretty healthy over here. Lots of trees, a lot less trees right through in this area. So we might be able to, let's say we bought this chunk right here of land. We could look at this and we might say, what's going on in there? The soils must be different because those trees sure seem happy. They don't seem as happy over here. So maybe there's two different kinds of soils. We could probably figure that out. If there's a soil survey, and there's a good chance there is, we could probably figure out what's going on there, and we could get some clues. And with a little bit of knowledge, we'd be able to say, okay, well, if I buy this is what I'm going to have to expect. This might be how I need to manage it because this soil on one side is different than the soil on the other side. That's the tools that I'm hoping to show you. Okay, where are we going from here? Let's not worry about this so much. I think what I wanted to get down to is I wanted to show you the soil profile. Remember, the soil profile is all the layers. Here you get kind of a graphic. You can find this one right off the internet. This is not something that I came up with. If you look soil profile on a Google, you'll find this exact thing here. But you can kind of see that they've done it graphically with colors. But you remember I said soils form from the top down. So they've got some vegetation in this. And where do you see the roots are? The roots are up at the top. Where do you see the most, what looks like where you'd want to live if you were a soil living organism, roots or insect or something like that? Up there where there's things going on, you can see the roots are up there, but you see the roots aren't going down too far in this one. That's deliberate. They're basically showing you again, soils form from the top down. The stuff at the bottom, that's just like when either the flood dumped it there or that's the rock, because soils can form out of the rock in place as well. See, I told you there's a whole bunch of stuff we could talk about, but the idea is that I really wanted to show you these layers through here. So really quickly, the A horizon, and that's what they call it over here. The A horizon is going to be probably the most fertility. That's where the roots live and die, and they start with. That's where insects and whatnot are going to be. That's where any of the inputs from the atmosphere are first going to go. And then, of course, the water will move through this one from the atmosphere through. And then you don't worry about this E horizon, but what I want to focus is the B horizon. A lot of soils will have what's called a B horizon. And we have a lot of little things we put on the end of these little subscripts to tell what's going on in that. We're not going to do that. But a B horizon is basically an accumulation horizon. It's a horizon of accumulation. And that's really important as well, because anything that is formed over time in the horizons above that moves with that water, that soil solution moves down through. And at some point, based on climate or based on how much, watering gets done, will accumulate somewhere below the surface in a horizon that's we call the B horizon. Okay. Now, why is that important? Well, clay forms in the B horizon. Anything that might be in the soil or wash out of the atmosphere that can be dissolved in the soil solution actually will move through that A horizon, down through the layers, down through the soil profile, and will collect in a B horizon. So that's where you find all the zone of accumulation. That might be important because that might be where your roots end up. It might be down there at say 18 inches, or it might be down there at 12 inches. And that may affect the properties of that layer, may affect what you're trying to do, whether it's storing water for your crop, or maybe it's collecting things that you don't want. Maybe it's collecting salts that may be harmful or detrimental to what you're trying to grow. May collect out in the West, we collect salts and carbonates in that because we have a dry environment where I live in the West. Not all the West is dry. And that tends to be what we have a lot of. We don't have a lot of moisture, so we end up with salts and carbonates often collecting. That changes the chemistry. So when the chemistry gets changed, we end up having a pH that's higher in our cases because we don't have the moisture, and that actually can affect how we're going to grow something, or what we're going to grow, or what we need to do to manage the soil so that we can grow whatever it is that we're looking to do. So understanding these things, again, you can see soil is a lot more than just calling it dirt. It's more than that Webster definition of the upper layer that can be dug or plowed. You can see there's a whole lot more going on than that. While all that's true, that's just, no pun intended, just scratching the surface of what it is. That was a good one. I'll have to remember that one. Okay, so I just kind of wanted to show you this so you get a graphic image of what we're talking about when we say soil layers and soil profile. So this picture does a good one. If you like different colors, there's a bunch of them on the internet. You can just look up, just Google soil profile images, and you'll get more than you want to. Again, this is not really important. That's not important. There's some interesting stuff there. Let's just talk about this one here, topsoil and subsoil. You'll hear topsoil a lot. Topsoil pretty much is just the surface soil. It's not really necessarily a scientific term, but if you hear about topsoil, it should be that dark surface. And it could be out in the West. If we get 2 inches, we're happy. If you go back east and you get a lot more rain, your topsoil could be 10, 15, 20 inches thick. It could be a lot of good stuff, or it may not be. So it's just sort of I just throw that out there. It's sort of a general term. It's not really a certain depth. It's just a term. So and it's just what it says. Topsoil is topsoil at the surface. What happens if you're in a cropped field and the stuff at the surface is eroded away? It's still called topsoil, but it might have been the subsoil before that. You see what I mean? So topsoil, by definition, you might think of it, or a person might think of it as the good stuff. But if you're in an area that's not been managed well, then what might have been the good stuff might be what was below the good stuff. You might not have any topsoil left. It might be what was underneath that. So that's something else to realize. Again, erosion happens. Water erosion happens, wind erosion happens, and it's a constant process. What we do as humans often accelerates what's essentially a natural process, and we accelerate it beyond what the soil can restore. So erosion is not like unexpected. I mean, you look some of our national parks are based on geologic erosion, right? I mean, Grand Canyon and places like that, places out in Moab and Zion in Utah. We're looking at geologic erosion to form those beautiful structures. But when we actually accelerate that, and that's what it's called, accelerated erosion, we actually say mismanage. I'm trying to be judgmental here. So when a person would perhaps not manage the soil in a way that the soil could rejuvenate faster than it's lost, we call that accelerated erosion. So then it doesn't, it's not no longer a natural process. It's a human influence process. And that sometimes can be detrimental. And so if you're looking for land, let's say, to grow, knowing that could happen, and knowing that you might not be getting the primo stuff anymore because it wasn't managed well for many years, and you don't have what was there. That's important to understand as well. That you might not be looking, even the web soil survey, as we get into that, might show you one thing, but you would have to understand, it's like, just because the web soil survey, and I'll talk about this when we get there, but it may not be what the web soil survey says it is, because the web soil survey doesn't take into account individual management. It looks at the soil, and if a whole area was widespread issues, we might be able to call a particular soil, we might give it an eroded designation, but we wouldn't be able to individually do that on a field by field basis. In other words, we wouldn't call any particular owner out and say, well, inside this guy's property or inside this person's property, this is such and such soil, but it's bad soil. It's a bad version. No, we don't do that. We just call it this soil. So again, to understand that you might not have the topsoil that the web soil survey says that soil has, would be important for you to understand. I lost my train of thought there, but you just need to understand that as we get into it and begin to look for different soils for purchase. Now, this is a slide that I promised you. Now, you got a little bit of information about soils from the top down, and you got a little information with horizons. I mentioned the A horizon, the B horizon. We also sometimes can have an O horizon, which is an organic layer, and we often have a C horizon. But what I wanted to show you here, and this is to sort of sum it all up. Here's the surface right here. If you look at this dashed line right here, this is what we call, this is how soil scientists make the distinctions between different kinds of soils. And what that basically means is that the B horizon is the most important, because we look at if it's got a B horizon, we look at the characteristics of the B horizon to be able to distinguish that soil from all other soils with B horizons or soils that don't have them. So that would be for us. Now, what about for people who are like managers, the water company, or people who want to make regional plans? What are they looking at? Whoops, I did it the wrong way. Let's go back up here. Okay, they're actually looking at the whole profile. That's just, I don't know why I keep doing that. I think I got too no, it doesn't matter. My fingers are too big or something. So they're looking at the whole soil. They're not looking at individual stuff. They're looking at the whole profile. But what about you and me who want to buy a piece of property? Goes back to, we're looking at this area right here. And can you see that the importance is right here in the surface? That's why this line kind of bulges out like this. I'm actually on this line. Can you see this? This is, I didn't actually mention, it's increasing importance for each application. This is for us, biological diversity and plant growth. If we're going to buy something, isn't that what we want? Don't we want the biological diversity? Because that means a healthy soil. If plants are growing really well, that means a healthy soil. Those things go hand in hand. And can you see where most of that actually is? It's right here in the surface, right where we're calling this stuff the topsoil. And you can see that if we lost this A horizon, if we lost that, and this was now our topsoil, this upper part of the B horizon, can you see how less important it is? We've lost almost half of that diversity and that ability to grow plants well just by losing that. So you can see that the importance of management is critical, or not managing this soil can be even more critical, because you can lose it and you cannot get it back in your lifetime naturally. So that may mean that you have to do any number of things to try to bring that diversity and bring that the ability to grow plants back. So I just throw that out there just to sort of reinforce the point that I made. Okay, really quickly here, this is just, and I think I'm going to summarize, and we'll zip out of it. We've been about a half hour, I think, on this. That's probably enough time on an introduction. But I'll throw these last little things here to try to tie it together, and hopefully I've whetted your appetite to actually learn more about soil, just with this little, very, very little, tiny little taste of what goes on with soil. But let's just look at this again. There's 4 major components of soil. the air, water, mineral matter, that's the solids. And then we talked to the air and the water make up the voids, the pore space. And then there's going to be some organic materials. And we saw that there's going to be more organic materials the closer you are to the surface. This is kind of what it would look like. Okay, you got mineral, air, and water, pore space and soil solids, and a little bit of organic material. Now, what's the importance of this? This is how I want you to think about your soil. So when you go out and you're looking at stuff, this is what you need to look at. This mineral layer right through there, that mineral layer, that's your chemistry. That's actually, you need water and you need what's dissolved in the water, but your chemistry goes on inside that mineral layer. And really quickly, the more sand your soil has, or the more that, this is so general, but let me just say, if your soil is dominated by sand, then you'll have less natural chemical activity. Chemical activity equates to fertility or lack of fertility. Okay, this is without adding anything to it. This is just on a natural basis. That's because sand is not chemically reactive. Sand is just a very small rock or a rock fragment. When you get into the clays, silts to some extent, but mostly the clays. Silts are kind of like, yeah, we're going to leave them alone because they do have an influence, but not as much as sands would have and clays would have. So sands provide a bulk. Sands provide large pore space, large spaces between rocks, between soil particles. But the clay is where your chemistry happens. So yes, you can have way too much clay because clay has its own set of problems. But clay is where fertility or lack of fertility, it lives or dies. And again, that's not really doing justice to that at all because there's so much more in that. But I say that just so that when you look at the Web Soil Survey and you look to purchase land or to see the quality of land, you'll want to understand that when you look down through, and again, I'll show you this, when you look down through the soil profile and you see what kind of layers are there, and you look at the chemistry that some of the information that's given to you, that will, or you look at the amounts of sand, silt, and clay that it tells you that are in those soils. This is something that you can go and replicate yourself. And I'll tell you that as well. You'll want to do your own due diligence. If you had a piece of property, for instance, you want to go out and look at it. You want to go more than just kick it. You want to go dig a little hole here and there and have a look and see, does the soil survey fit this area? But if it doesn't fit, you would still be able to have enough knowledge to say, yeah, it's pretty good stuff, or this is just what I was looking for. So the clay is important. Too much clay can give you problems with water movement challenges, but you'll have more natural inherent fertility if you've got some measure of clay versus just a sandy soil. That's not to say that Florida is all sand, and nobody thinks of Florida as not being a very sort of Garden of Eden kind of state. That's primarily because of the fact that they have no limitations with water, and they have no limitations with climate. So you can grow a lot of stuff just by adding water to it, even if it's just kind of sand. But we're not looking to buy a state, and we may not have those options. We may have a sand versus clay, or a sand over clay, or clay over sand. So we kind of need to know that, generally speaking, what would we like to look at? If we want to grow something and we want to grow it naturally, then we would like to have a soil that's not too clayey and not too sandy, right? So if it's one or the other, we're going to have some challenges that we're going to have to overcome. I'll leave it with that. And I think what I want to do, I'm not sure what's next. Yes.
May I interject and ask you a question before we proceed
Absolutely.
to the web survey?
Absolutely.
For the purposes of legacy building, where you have some people that have vineyards and farms for hundreds of years within their family lineage, for sustainability purposes concerning the crops and the infrastructure when it comes to the foundation of a home, because sometimes I've noticed just in being in homes where there's a shift, or even apartment buildings where there's a shift in the actual infrastructure of the building. So how important is the soil selection for sustainability of the land or the crops on the land and the actual infrastructure of the home?
Well, if I'm answering your, tell me if I'm not answering your question the way you expected. But I think depending on what you want to do with the soil, and again, I'll go back to the first part. You said farms that have been farmed, let's say, continuously for decades, if not longer. In this country, we probably have only a few that might be 100 years. But in other countries, I know, yes, they've had continuous farming for longer than that. Sustainability, sometimes your climate helps you, and you can make a lot of mistakes out of, or you can be ignorant um, because of the time in history when you were doing such, and we didn't have maybe some of the information, or they didn't have some of the information we have now. But maybe climate was forgiving enough that they were able to do it. Maybe technology or industry hadn't come along. So when industry came along and we were able to do things mechanized, it was a huge help. But it also caused some of the problems that led to the Dust Bowl. Was industry. You know, we were able to actually now use a mechanism to turn the prairies over. Well, we didn't understand what that actually meant. Yes, it meant a lot of productivity. It meant we could feed our people, but we didn't understand that we were now destroying our soil faster than it could be replaced. We didn't understand that. So I think it's very important to sort of understand what you have, that you have to sort of, like, again, apartment complex. Are you trying to do a community garden there? Yes, it would be important. An apartment complex, for instance, might have less of a choice. You might have, depending on where it is, you might be artificial soils. It might be soils that never existed together, and you just got a dump truck came and scraped some stuff from here and collected some stuff from there, and they said, we're going to give you a community garden, and they put a whole bunch of that lower profile, say C material or even B material, and they said, here you go, grow in it. Or you might be in an area that is natural, and you have farmed it. And again, I could give anecdotal evidence. Here I will give this one because this is actually quite relevant. When I teach a class, I talk about this very thing, this sustainability. And I have family who lives in the Midwest, and I would often drive from where I live to the Midwest. And just before I got to my family's house, I would, they live in the country. They're not farmers, but they live in the country. I would go back for years. I'd go past this one individual's property, and depending on what time of year it was, that individual would be out on his tractor and would be pulling implement through that soil. And I would comment to my wife, I'd say, looks like, Joe, I don't know his name, but looks like his wife must have kicked him out again. He didn't know what else to do. So he's back out there, because he was always out there. He was just always out there, just turning dirt, as it were. Well, his soil did not look that good. It wasn't flat, but it was relatively flat. But that picture I showed you, you could see that for yourself. You could see highs and lows in the field, and you could see definite color differences. I know those color differences mean the soil is not being sustained. I know he's losing soil through erosion, either wind erosion or water erosion. In that case, it was both. That part of the country, you suffer from both. I noticed not 3 weeks ago, I happened to be back in that same place. Hadn't been back for a couple of years, and I noticed that Joe wasn't on his tractor, but there was a big sign that said sold, and they've turned it into commercial development. It's going to be a subdivision. Now, it was an unusual spot for a subdivision, and I don't know the history. I don't know anything except what I have observed. But my thought was, I wonder if Joe sold that. Now he could have passed. He could have gotten to be old, and maybe he just couldn't work it anymore. Maybe he had children, didn't want it. I don't know. There could be any number of stories, but it could just be as likely. And I know it's happened throughout the country that because of maybe less than ideal management, that soil no longer became sustainable. The soil was very forgiving. And this is a prairie soil. Prairie soils are most fertile soils, but they're also the soils with the most topsoil. So the topsoil, again, if you remember, is where the good stuff happens. That's what we want. But in prairie soils, because they're under grasses, are the best soils, because grass, again, another topic, but grass-based soils provide the most nutrients, the most organic matter, all those things which are desirable from a fertility standpoint. I just wondered if perhaps maybe another reason was that over however many decades that this had been farmed the same way, that it no longer became sustainable. We have a little bit of inflation comes in and some issues like that with the country. And it's like all of a sudden I can't afford the inputs because it's not producing what it could produce or what it might have produced or what it did produce. And all of a sudden, with inputs costing a little bit more, I can't afford it. The yield that I'm going to get is not worth, it's not sustainable. Now, I might be able to talk to Joe all day and never convince him that he might have made a mistake 50 years ago. He might have his own reasons. So these things become I guess what I'm saying is it becomes a difficult thing to talk to somebody else about it. But absolutely, to sort of answer your question, if I don't get too far off track, sustainability can be achieved, and actually soils that even in that condition can be brought back, but it takes knowledge of what's going on in the soil. What is it that I'm trying to change? You just can't throw a bunch of organic matter out there. Let's say it comes out of the back end of a horse, and you got a guy that says you can have as much as you want. You say, well, this is organic, it's got to be good. And this is an actual story. I mean, it's an actual story. And you put it on your property and nothing grows. And it's like, what happened? Well, you didn't understand that you can't take organic matter that's fresh like that and not let it compost, not let it, they call it hot. You can't do that and put it on your soil and think, well, it's organic matter and organic matter equals good for plants. Yeah, it does, but there's a whole bunch of stuff that there's a whole bunch of other caveats inside that we're ignoring. There's a whole bunch of other things that we have to take into consideration. So knowledge is power, right? I mean, we that's not obviously not original with me, but it's the same thing with soil. It's the same thing with sustainability. If we want to be good stewards, and our agency, of course, is all about taking your money and trying to be good stewards with the soil and helping you be good stewards with the soil. I agree with that. I mean, I totally support that philosophy. Maybe not exactly all the way that we achieve it, but that's bureaucracy. But I support the philosophy. But each of us as individuals can take that philosophy and within our own ability. You don't have to be a millionaire. It doesn't take that. It just takes the understanding of how does the soil form? What is it the soil needs? What am I taking from the soil by doing this? How am I damaging or affecting? Let's not use the word damaging. How am I affecting the soil by doing this? Is it positive or is it negative? What's my end goal? And how can I achieve that? If we understand those things, it's not complicated. It's not complicated. People for thousands of years understood these things almost intuitively. People of the land, they understood this, even if they couldn't lecture it or have some PowerPoint slides. They understood that. So we can too. Modern day people, we can too. It doesn't take a lot, but it does take just a little bit of education. The more you disturb your soil, the more, the generally speaking, the worse it is. So you want to leave your soil. Just like if somebody came through, your house, and every day a freeway went through your house. I mean, it would be very disruptive. If every day you had to rebuild your house because somebody put a freeway through it, I mean, you would lose there would be a lot of time and energy. You would not get your housework done because you'd be busy trying to repair the house and get rid of the freeway. And here it comes again, 6 o'clock, here comes the freeway again. You'd never get anything done. You'd never get ahead on your house. And so what would you finally do? You'd move, you'd give up. You'd say, I'm done with this. Have the house. If it's going to be a freeway anyways, I give up. Well, think about that. You're doing the same thing. When you pull a piece of metal through the soil, it's the same thing. You're disrupting. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't do it. The freeway might be needed there to get 50,000 people to work so that they could make money and feed their family. So I'm not making a judgment call on it. I'm just saying it is what it is. But if we can affect that, and if other words, if you could have convinced somebody to put the freeway between the two houses, you and your neighbor, that might have been acceptable. It might have been a little noisy, but you could have still lived your life. So if we can think on terms kind of like that, whatever we do with the soil is affecting something, and everything is kind of related. Go back to those spheres that we talked about at the very beginning. We're touching on all those different spheres, especially the biosphere. If we don't have life in our soil, then the only way we're going to get anything to grow in that is by adding the inputs. Some people are okay with that. some people are okay with just putting inputs in, chemical fertilizers, pesticides, whatever it might need. But the soil has the ability to provide, generally speaking, everything that we need for it to grow. Maybe not necessarily immediately. You may not be able to purchase something that's maybe been managed less than well and have expected to do that. But if we can develop habitat in our soil that the organisms want to be there, if we leave organic matter, which is what they eat, in the soil, if we don't disturb their homes by putting a freeway through it every couple of weeks or every few days, then they're going to want to be there. They're going to say, this is a good place. We got food, we got water coming through here, there's air, and nobody's really messing with us. So that's very superficial in one sense. I mean, there's so much more going on, but I think that's kind of sets the stage. When we have those communities, then those communities begin to function for each other. And again, the analogy is kind of human relations too. If you have a community that's at peace, if you will, then that community, those people are putting again, no pun intended, they're putting their roots into their own community, and they're saying, hey, we're going to stay here. And when they do that, they begin to make longer term investments in the community. So you begin to develop these relationships in the soil between different microorganisms and the roots. And then nutrients begin to be shared and developed and be shared. The soil itself is creating its own nutrients. We're storing material in the soil when we're not disturbing it, rather than releasing it to the atmosphere. So it's kind of simple. You can see that. Don't disturb the soil, but any more than you have to. But understand what that means. Sure, how are you going to get a seed in the soil if you don't disturb it? Understandably. But you don't plant that seed every day. You don't dig it back up and plant it again the next day and then dig it up and plant it. No, you disturb it once, you plant the seed, and maybe you plant the seed hole by hole. I'm not saying you should or you shouldn't, but maybe that's how you want to do it because you can. And it's the least amount of disturbance, rather than digging the whole thing up and just then having a line of seeds. So if you understand why you're doing what you're doing and what the ramifications are, then it makes it a lot easier for anybody, for any of us. And I'm not a gardener. I like to grow things, but I'm really not a gardener. But I understand the principles, and I understand that just like humans, don't destroy the community. Don't destroy it. You destroy it, everybody leaves, and the community ends up being a shell of itself. And maybe only a part of it functions. There's one convenience store left, not a grocery store, not a clothing store, not a department store in sight. But we got the corner convenience store. That's it. Well, who wants to go shop, for all your necessities at one corner store that also is a gas station? That's not the way anybody wants to live. That's not community. But unfortunately, that's the reality that some people have. So it's the same with the soil. We don't have to do that, but a lot of times we do. And maybe it's ignorance, or maybe it's something else. But with the soil, we can actually change it. We have a little bit more control over that. It's ours. And if we know what's going on there, we can actually build that community. So hopefully that sets I hate to say set the stage, because we keep going on and on. I keep promising to do web soil survey. Are you ready for me to do that, Deborah? Or do you have another question?
I am. I just have one quick recap that I would like for you to do. You mentioned the element or the component, one of the components of the soil being time. What was the other four? I may have missed it.
I didn't tell you because I was afraid I'd get into the weeds, but there are 5 soil forming factors, and time and climate are 2 of the big ones.
Okay.
There's also there's also parent material, which is the parent material means what is the earthy material that the soil is being formed in. And it could be the rock underneath it, or it could be something that's transported, like I said, by a flood. It could be there's a whole bunch of stuff in there. Organisms are another one. Organisms, organic matter, whatnot would be another. And then the topography is yet another one. What does the land surface look like? Because then climate has a big effect on that. And you can say, just from the shadow of the sun in the northern hemisphere, north to south, for instance, north is going to be a lot different than the south, depending on how steep of a slope that you might have. So all the ramifications with warmth and water evaporation, you can see that's going to change things. So climate gets modified with topography. So that's exciting stuff if you're into it. For me, it's very exciting, but don't get me started. That's why I tried to avoid it, because that's a
Thank you, Peter.
whole nother thing we can get into. And I got better pictures for that, but then I'll never stop talking. This is the boring stuff.
I love your passion for the subject. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Let me get rid of this one and we'll go back to that. Now you can still see that, right?
Yes.
Okay. So let's segue into Web Soil Survey. So you can actually see, Deborah and I talked about this before. To find this is the home page to, it's run by our agency, but that's not why I'm plugging it. I'm plugging it because it's really the only, to my knowledge, in the entire world, it's the most extensive soils database. It's really only United States. We don't have responsibility for soils in other countries, although we do help out in many countries. We are not the best or the worst. We have just this system. This is our system. So I think it's a great system. I personally was involved on the other side of it, where I actually provided data for many, many years as a field soil scientist. Now I actually interpret the data, which is kind of what I'm doing now, which is I get to talk a lot more. But the program itself is constantly updated. Every year we have what we call a refresh, and new data is added to it, and new interpretations are added to it. And that's probably the thing that is most important. What we're looking at here is a database. You're looking at the public side of this relational database, if you will, which means that we can actually run a whole bunch of rules in the background with the data that we've collected. And the data might have been collected 50 years ago. We can actually manipulate that data to generate more data. In some cases, if we don't have enough, we can say, well, based on our knowledge of all these soil properties, they didn't actually measure this, but we can do a pretty good guess with the information that we do have, and we can run this interpretation, or we can run this rule, and we might be able to actually get some more data based on the actual data that we do have that would allow us to make some more interpretations, or to make some more predictions about how this soil might behave. So there's a lot of information in here. It's not going to meet every need. And I will say right up before I get into it, what you need to understand is that it is not site specific. So the way the data is collected, there's no way that the United States government could afford to have a soil survey that was done on your half acre. You might get lucky, and you might find that someone actually did dig a hole right on your half acre, but that would be somewhat akin to winning the lottery, right? So probably it's not going to happen, and it's okay that it didn't happen, because the way that the soil surveys are done is they're done on a person or a soil scientist becomes familiar with the landscape in an area, and it's a predictive process. If they don't know anything about an area, let's just say somebody sent them to Mars. They don't know anything about Mars soil except for what the rovers collected. So you would start someplace, you dig a hole, and you say, well, I'm digging a hole here in the valley, and the valley stretches in all directions, and before it gets to the foothills over there, and I'm going to guess that the valley's got some similar soils. Here's hole number one. Let me walk over there 500 feet and dig and see if hole number two, which is on the same part of the landform, still in the valley, looks like hole number one. If it does, hey, we've got a prediction going, right? Now the prediction is this whole valley is going to be similar to these two holes that I've just dug. Now I might be able to go out a half a mile and dig again and say, okay, we're still in the valley. Let's see if hole number three looks like holes number 1 and 2. Oh, by golly, it does. Our prediction now becomes more solidified, right? So now we can begin to say, with a good amount of assurance, we can say this whole valley is going to have these characteristics. And we have 3 data points right now that have some variation with them. So we know that there's going to be at least that amount of variation in these soils. but we also know that they're very similar. So we can actually now begin to set limits on what our properties for the soils in the valley are based on however much data we collected. However, we don't know the whole valley. We didn't dig a hole every 5 feet. So we still might miss something. And sometimes we try to say in the write-ups, I'll show you that, hey, there might be these other soils in there and they look kind of like this. And then you would have to do your due diligence and say on your own property and say, is there anything different than what they say? And read down through it and say, oh, they did mention that they have these kind of soils and those kind of soils. I wonder if that's not what this is. And they might have very different properties. Remember I said soils can vary significantly over very short distances. So you still have to you have to understand the limitations of the web soil survey. And you really have to do your due diligence and say, I need to look at the property, I need to walk the property, and I need to sort of like understand what the web soil survey is saying and understand if what I'm seeing on the ground is actually matching what the web soil survey says. Okay, so with that caveat there, hopefully that gives you enough understanding. This is a button you see. All you gotta do is type in web soil survey on any search engine and you'll come to this page. There's no other web soil survey. So you can put it all together with one word, or you can all separate it into 3 different words. You'll still come to this page. There's a lot of stuff on this page. You don't have to worry about that. If you're interested, you'll come back and explore on your own. All you got to really do is hit that big green button. And it's going to come up to a map of the United States. So I'm way over here in Southern California, and you may be way over here someplace. So it doesn't really matter because we have information that covers this whole area. So let's just say that you want to give me a spot. We're going to choose a spot. We want to look at some land, and we're going to it can be a place you know or a place you don't know. Deborah, you tell me where we should go.
Select some place in Georgia.
Okay, so look, we can do this. We can actually go over here, quick navigation. We could actually put in an address if we wanted to get specific, or we could come over here. We could do state and county, or we could even, if there's a whole bunch of other stuff, you can do lat long if you knew the soil survey area. If you're into all the section, township, and range, there's a whole bunch of stuff. You want to look at National Park Service units, you could do anything. But okay, you said let's go to Georgia. Okay, let's go to Georgia. You want to put in a county? I don't know anything about Georgia.
Let's do Banks.
Banks County. Okay. So what we're going to probably do, we're going to click the view button over here, and it's going to take us to Banks County, Georgia. All right. Now you can see that it's hard to see some of the different lines here, but let me show you how this works. There's a little legend button up here like that. You click that one, you click it out, and it shows you what's going on through here. You can actually add things and take things off. So, we've got states and counties done through here. You could click on urban areas. You can see it's got cities. I can see a couple of them. I'll try to zoom in on them. So there's some different things in here that you could actually maybe adjust. I think you can actually go down. Let's see if I can click my mouse and go down. So you can see you can get highways and other features in there as well. If you don't want the aerial photography, you can just click it out and you can just get a topographic map. So to see what's what, you do that, but you can close it. So it gives us some of these highways on here. Let's just say let me make a choice here. Let's go over to that's Banks County. Let's go to, I think it says Gillisville. How's that? Can we go to Gillisville?
Absolutely.
Okay. I'm just going to say, I've got an interactive map right here. I can use these buttons up here. I can zoom in. So here's Gillisville right here. If I want to click it, I can just click it. You see my crosshairs I'm walking around. I can just double click it. It's going to zoom into that, and it'll just keep zooming in. This button up here, this magnifying glass with a plus on it, that's what's highlighted. So whenever I click, that's what I get. So I'll just hit right in the middle of Gillisville here, and it's going to keep zooming in on it. So you can kind of see that there's all the blue lines are all the streams that are in there. So that might tell you something. You could get rid of those if you didn't like them. And then let's just say I'm just going to zoom in more because I know where I'm going, I think. And I want to be able to see.
That means they have a good water source then.
Well, you could assume that they would. Yeah, you could assume that they would. All right, you can see that. You can see now that I've actually got I've actually got Highway 52, County Road 124. I hope you can see that all right. I'm looking at my
Yes, yes,
my
I'm
lap.
able to see.
My other picture looks a lot better. So you can see right then and there that that we've got a lot of information. Now, that let's just say that we really wanted Gillisville. Is that what it's called? Gillsville, sorry, or Gillsville, probably. My daughter lives in Tennessee and she's everything she says is Vull. So I think probably it's not Bill, it's probably Vull or something like that. So I apologize. My pronunciation is not even close. But the next thing we have to do is we have to choose an area that we want to specifically look at.
Okay.
Okay. So we can choose anything. Let's find an agricultural bit. We have to use what these buttons up here, these AOI buttons. AOI stands for area of interest.
All
And
right.
the rectangle means that we can just drag an area. If we just say, oh, I
Okay.
want to generally know what things are like out here. Or we could say, I want to know this particular property. And that we could use this other button right here. And then we could zoom in. Let's just zoom in one more. We got to click the mouse, and it's going to zoom in one more. And I could say, oh, you know what? I really want to know about this piece of property right here. And I click it, and you can see I'm drawing a line. I want this one. I want this one. And I'm going to go over here. I don't want those people's property in there, but I want everything on this side of the highway and say up to there. Okay. So now I'm going to get information just for that. Now it's telling me you might get something like this. In other words, I probably crossed the county boundary. A lot of times soil surveys are done on county boundaries. I've probably crossed that. So that's all right. It doesn't matter. I'm just going to close it. It shows you what a hatched area, what it is. Now, that's the area that for whatever reason we've chosen to be interested in. I know nothing about this area, except that there's going to be some folks in Gillis probably are not going to sell us nothing. But that's okay. We can still look at their information. So now you see this tab up here called area of interest. That's what we've defined. You can just run along these. The next one would be the soil map. What soils are actually in there? Okay. So over here on the left, you can see we've got a soil survey of Banks and Stevens County. And then over here we have a soil survey that says Barrow, Hall, and Jackson counties. Okay, so there's just like we thought, there's 2 counties in there. We must have crossed the county line. But now what you see is all of these orange lines in here. Those are the soil maps. Those are where your different soils are on this particular landscape. So that's where we're going to find some different similarities. Now, if we look over here again, we can see that we have something called MLC3, Madison Sandy Clay Loam, 6 to 10% slopes. Oh, look at this, severely eroded. Remember I mentioned that? Some
Yes.
places they may actually have that. Now that is, I'm looking, that is right here, MLC3. This is severely eroded. Now, it doesn't look bad to me. So again, you have to do your due diligence. Maybe this is not severely eroded, maybe, but in general it is. So you'd have to know that. Now, if we go down here in this other one, we have a couple more soils. Okay, you can see we have the same soil over here. Madison, we have an MLC2, Madison Sandy Clay Loam, 6 to 10% slopes, moderately eroded. See, they've done that out in this part of Georgia. They've actually made a distinction on erosion of soils. So that's actually good. So the map unit name itself gives you some information. We know that the surface on all these, we know that this one is a sandy clay loam. Now, once we know that's a texture, that's going to tell us a lot about what the surface is going to be able to do as far as water moving in and out, et cetera, et cetera. You have these other ones, sandy loam, sandy clay loam. This one here doesn't give you anything, but they also tell you the slopes. I don't see anything here that's less than a 6% slope. That means you ain't flat. You're not flat. If you're looking for flat stuff, then you may have to change your thought process if you were going to buy some land through here. So without knowing anything else, we've got some information on that. We know what the soil surface texture is. And once we begin to learn a little bit more about soils, and we get into the textures of soils, which I did not touch on deliberately, because I told you there's just too much stuff in there. And I got to be careful that I don't sidetrack, because then I'll think, oh, you got to know this, you got to know that. But those surface textures, they're made up of sand, silt, and clay. A sandy loam is different than a sandy clay loam, which is different than a loamy sand, which is different than a clay, et cetera, et cetera. but they're all made up of different proportions of sand, silt, and clay, and nothing else. Sand, silt, and clay. And because those sand, silt, and clay, those particles have very distinct properties from each other, the proportion of sand, silt, and clay in any soil layer, is going to affect how water moves through there, the soil solution, how much air can get in there, how water is stored there, potentially your natural fertility. And it's also going to give you a pretty good idea of any management problems you might run into. Again, remember I said clay is going to have more issues transmitting water, draining water than say a sand would. No, sand doesn't have any problem at all. Sand's got the opposite problem. Sand, you can't store water. You move it too fast, you want it to stay, it just keeps moving. So you can actually begin to just look at these map unit names and begin to start getting some interpretations out of that just by doing a little bit of study on your own as to what soil textures, what they mean. And again, the names themselves of the soil textures are indicative. Sandy, clay, loam. So that means it's a clay loam. It means it's got clay in it, but maybe not so bad because it's also got the word loam in it. It's also got the word sand in it. So that's a very, very basic. So you got everything. So it's like, well, might not be too bad. If it just said clay loam without the sand, you might think, well, I don't say anything about sand in that. Might mean it's going to have some more challenges with water movement than say a sandy clay loam. And you'd be correct. If it just says clay, doesn't say sandy anything or loam anything, then well, clay is clay. So now you're probably going to have even more, say, water movement challenges just based on the name. And that's the surface layer. That's not underneath it. We still don't know what's underneath that. Okay, there's your background. Here's what your soil map looks like. You can, I think on this one, you can, let me see if I can scroll down underneath the map. Oh yeah, I need to show this thing. It'll always tell you this. Soil map may not be valid. So if you zoom in too close, even though the information doesn't change, they want you to make sure that it's not site specific. And they're going to warn you that it's not site specific. So if you want to zip in on a 1 acre property, it may show you the data, but it wants you to understand that the closer you get in, the less likely that this soil survey is going to match exactly what it is. Because again, remember how we made our predictive process to actually make these. There's no way somebody could be all over this map and dig enough holes to say, I got this thing nailed down. Wherever you might be in this little area, I know what it is. There's no way. It's impossible. It would be a trillion years of digging, and then we'd have the whole country dug up. Okay, we don't want to do that. Let's go back. So you kind of see this. Now, how are we going to get some actual data? We've got the soil map. We've got a few names there. We go to this next tab. Actually, what I should stop right now and do is this. Deborah, we talked about the fact that you can, this information is not just only visible on screen, but you can actually have this data sent to yourself. Let's just say this is something you really want. You can actually do two things. You can keep this. You can either print it. If you got a nice color printer set up to this thing, you can actually just click printable version and it'll give you the choice to choose a printer on your system and you'll just print it. Or you can do this. You can add it to your shopping cart. I'm just going to go ahead and do that. It says add displayed data to a custom report. View, save, or print from your shopping cart tab. Now, shopping cart makes you think you're going to have to spend money, but you already did that if you paid your taxes. You don't got to pay a cent for this. This is all good to go. Let's just say we want to keep the record of this. We're going to add it to our shopping cart, and I can put a title on here if I want. I can say, whatever I want to call it, or I don't have to. I can just hit OK. It's in my shopping cart. So let's go to the Soil Data Explorer. That's the next tab. All right. What are we going to do with this, Deborah? What are we looking for? What are we looking for in this piece of property? Because you can see here that I've got a whole new set of tabs. The first tab's here. If you want to know more about soils in general, you can click on that. I'm not going to do it. The first tab that comes highlighted is suitabilities and limitations for use. The second one is going to be actual soil properties and qualities. Don't worry about ecological sites. That one sometimes functions, but it's not as important for what we're doing right now. You can explore any of these things on your own as well. And soil reports actually combines some of these suitabilities and limitations and soil properties and qualities into an actual report. You get the same data this way, or you can go right to the reports. I'll click over to reports. You can kind of see what I'm talking about. You can kind of see there's a whole bunch of stuff into your building site development, which we saw over here under suitabilities and limitation. construction material, land classifications, and there's all kinds of stuff. So chemical properties, so physical properties, and there's water features and whatnot. So there's a whole bunch of stuff, and we'll look at those quickly. But there's too much stuff for us to look at. So I kind of want to just give you a taste of where we're going for something specific, and then give you the tools to go back and explore on your own. So let's go back to the suitabilities and limitations for use soil. Okay, what do we want to do here?
We want to focus on, since we've covered a little bit about the soil, can we go into the building site development
Absolutely.
and what it takes in terms of when you're working with a developer, say for a building or for a home, the soil in which we've selected, what's going to be the best infrastructure for that soil?
Okay.
For legacy purposes.
Okay, so if we start with building site development, this pretty much means you can see what the sub categories are right through here. This would be something if we really wanted to do, if we wanted to actually use the soil for a house. So if we wanted to build a house, that now I don't know what I would imagine in Georgia they probably put basements in their houses, but I don't know, maybe they don't. But we could actually just say we want to build a house with a basement. Is it suitable out here? Now, there's plenty of houses out there. Maybe that's not what we want, but we could click on this. I'll just use this as an example. Let's just say we want to find is there any place in here and all these map units in this property where I'm going to have a problem building a house with a basement? This will tell you that. So you come up with this, and it gives you all this rubbish here. You don't have to actually worry about this. You can just click. If you really want to know how they're rating it, you can read this information. That's the view description. But if you really don't care, just say, give me the rating. Is it good or is it bad? You can click this button or this button. They're both the same. I give you one at the top and then one at the bottom. I don't know why they do that, but we'll just click that one. So you view the rating and it comes out just like that. So, okay, I'm going to slide this down just a little bit. So, okay, we got green and yellow. What the heck does that mean? Well, you can keep zooming. I mean, you can keep scrolling and it'll tell you down here. Okay. It'll tell you down through there and it'll give you a rating here. A rating of not limited means you can build all the houses with basements anywhere you want on that. There's no inherent soil property that's a problem. Over here on this one, it says these Pacolet soils, it says somewhat limited. Now you'll notice that these are 10 to 15% slopes. So we know right off the bat, Pacolet soils, the name says 10 to 15% slopes eroded. Okay. Somewhat limited. Why are they limited? Slope. So it says, now, so you say, okay, well, that's a problem. Well, I don't care about that. I got myself a bulldozer. I can take care of slope, no problem. So now you know that the only issue is slope. It's not because you got a high water table. It's not because of anything that might be a problem with a house with a basement. It's just that you got to deal with a slope. So if you look at that and you say, oh, I can overcome that, that's fine. So you've got no issue. So right now, right then and there, it tells you that there's obviously no rock down there because you're going to put a basement in. It didn't say anything about you're going to have to dig out rocks or rock is close to the surface. So you know just from that interpretation, if that was a question that you had, now that's answered your question. So that's how that system works. If you love that, if you said that is so awesome, that's exactly what I want to know, add it to your shopping cart. We'll just add to our shopping cart. We'll just say that was something, and again, you get the same opportunities, and we just close it. So that's actually how that works. If I don't like these, I don't like these things, but that's how they are. They're the kind of the chocolate colored is the one that's active. If you want to close it, you just click that caret, and you go back to this one. So you can see there's a whole bunch of other things through there as well. Now some of them are you going to put a solar array out there? Now maybe I do get people who want to do solar everywhere and they're going to use some of this property for solar. Okay, I'll tell you all the information that they would need for say solar arrays is going to be in there as well. Deborah, let me go ahead and close this one up. I'm going to say close all and I'm going to go back to the main suitabilities and limitation. Let's come down here to where it says land classifications.
All right.
Okay. So this actually might be something that we might be more interested in. So there's a whole bunch of stuff in here. How about farmland classification? That might be a good one to look at. So let's look at farmland classification. And so on this one, let's just quickly look at the description. Let's see what they're talking about. Farmland classification identifies map units as prime farmland, farmland of statewide importance, local importance, or unique, and identifies the location and extent of the soils that are best suited to food, feed, fiber, forage, and oilseed crops, blah, blah, blah. So without reading any of that stuff any further, that kind of says, hey, you know what? This will give us a good first cut as to whether this is what we want to look at or not.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go ahead and,
I agree.
let's view the rating on that. Okay, so now we can do the same thing. We've got red and blue, different colors. What does that mean? Have the same sort of chart down here. It says the rating is not prime farmland or that's severely eroded. That kind of makes sense. It's on 6 to 10% slopes. It's not prime farmland. But this appling sandy loam, 6 to 10% farmland of statewide importance. Everything else is not prime farmland. So we probably, if we were looking for farmland, we'd probably say, well, the only thing I'm really interested in is this APC unit. Let's go back up and see where that one is. Oh, look at that. So most of this is considered not prime farmland. Does that mean you can't grow crops on it? Absolutely not. It just means that it's not ideal stuff. But the state of Georgia has said, we like this appling, whatever this appling is, this blue stuff. We like that. That's a better soil. Now, if you noticed, and I did, you may not have, it's a sandy loam. It didn't have anything about clay in it at all. It doesn't say anything about eroded either. So what does that actually tell us? Let's just see, go up. Let's go back. See, I can do this. Let's go back to the soil map over here, okay? So that appling sandy loam, if you can see me down there, 6 to 10% slopes. There's only 20, just under 24 acres on our little area. And we can see, if I remember, it's right here. There's APC. And then there is some more, this chunk here is APC. And then I think this little bit right here is APC. We can actually see that there looks like a fairly good field right there on that. Now, what if we were able to buy this piece of property, this one they weren't selling? We would say that's pretty good stuff. That's the best stuff in this whole area. There's that little stuff right through there. It's got a few trees on it, but that's the same as this. If we had to buy property here, and we were going to try to use it for agricultural purposes, and it wasn't something, it was just standard agriculture. I don't know what they're growing here, but it wasn't like in California, for instance, we can take steep mountain slopes that have rock in them and we can grow avocados. Avocados love that stuff. But that is such an unusual situation that it doesn't fit the rest of the country for almost anything. Except you could say swampy land is good for rice or cranberries and say back east. That would be a similar analogy. I mean, unless you're going to grow cranberries, and you would not be buying swamp, right? But if you wanted cranberries, that might be what you're looking for. So the same thing would be here. If you're looking to grow grapes, let's just say, now I don't know, maybe some of those highly eroded soils, we'd have to know what the qualities are, and we'll get to that in just a moment. If you had a specific crop that you wanted to try here, and you knew that even if it's not prime farmland, you could grow them on that because you looked at what we're going to do, you looked at the soil characteristics, then you might just say, hey, I'm going to put an offer in on some of this other stuff. I'm going to get it for less money because I know it's not as high quality land, but for what I'm going to do, based on what the soil interpretations say, it's going to work just fine. It'll be fine for that. So but again, you have to know enough to be dangerous, right? So let's go back to the Soil Data Explorer. That's where we were. And there we go. There's our map again. So we know that if we wanted to look for just the best stuff, here's where it is. There's where it is. Again, we love this. We're going to add it to our shopping cart. Okay.
Now, if someone had wanted to select and look at whether or not they could grow, say, green beans, how would we know if the soil is suitable for that? How would they navigate through the survey to make a determination?
That's exactly where we're going to go next. I'm going to go ahead and close this out. So you can, again, see there's a whole bunch of stuff we could do in through there. And I'm only literally scratching the surface of what this can do. But let's actually go down to the next tab now, soil properties and qualities. Okay, now this is not going to tell us exactly whether we can grow green beans. We can't get that specific, and there's a reason for that. For us to
Right.
grow, for two gardeners who live next door to each other, who have exactly the same soil, one of them
Mm-hmm.
might be able to grow the greatest green beans that you've ever seen, while the other gardener can't grow them worth a darn, right? How is that? They're both growing them in the backyard and they both got the same soil. That's because there's things that soil can help you with, but the soil cannot overcome management, right? So
Gotcha.
what one gardener may be doing versus the other one has nothing to do with whether you can grow green beans or not, because one can and one can't. So
It's the
so that
management.
so it's not going to be that necessarily that specific. In some cases, you will find some standard crops, not green beans, but you'll find some standard crops where they actually do have data. And they'll say, for instance, like this particular soil typically has almond, so many bushels per acre is, and they give you a range.
All right.
That's actually less common than whatever, but you'll never find green beans, but that's okay, because we can come to the soil properties and qualities. Okay, I didn't want to do that. And I'm going to click soil chemical properties. Now,
All right.
the most important thing to growing anything vegetable wise is what's the pH. That's going to be the most important thing for us. Okay. So if we run this rating, let's look at the pH on all this. This will tell us a lot, and I'll show you we can actually get this from the reports as well. Sorry, there's one different thing I need to show you. Let me see if I can, where's my mouse gone to? My cursor. I got to go backwards on it. Oh, there you are. Okay, let me pull this down and show you one other thing here. This isn't, when you get this, there's one other option here that you have to do. When you see this pink over here, they want to know what part of the soil are you interested in. We're interested in green beans. Let's go back to inches, because you have two units of measure, inches and centimeters. The inches is what people are familiar with. Let's just say we want the upper depth to be 0, the surface of the soil. And let's just say all we really care about is the upper 12 inches. We know our roots are going to be mostly in the upper 12 inches. We don't really care anything else about that. So you may have to fill this actually in before you can actually run it. But it'll tell you that little pink thing. So I'm going to view the rating now. And now let's see what happens. It's all yellow. What does that mean? Okay, let's have a look and see what the report says. There's all yellow. And it basically says, let's see how this works. The rating. So in the rating in this case is actually, why didn't they do that for the other one? They may not have done it for the other one. Did I close that? Oh, I think I closed it. Hold on. There we go. Okay, so you can see right here. Okay, now the rating is actually, because we're doing pH, the rating is actually the pH. So for me, this is telling me there's going to be some challenges here, because a pH of 5.3 is really pretty challenging to grow stuff, right? So that means that we're probably going to have to, if we're going to grow green beans, we're going to have a couple issues that might relate to the fact that our pH is that low. There's a couple toxicities. Aluminum in particular becomes kind of an issue right about pH 5.2, 5.3. So the ideal pH is, again, right around neutral, 6.6 to 7.5. If we could have something, a pH in that range, we'd be super duper. But then again, it'd be nice if there's a lot of things that were just perfect, and they're not. We have to figure out, this is what we got to work with. How can we get around it? Well, that's okay. There are ways to actually increase the alkalinity. In other words, raise your pH so that so you're above this zone. Now, you may not be able to get it. You may only be able to get to say 6.1 or 6.2, but it can be done. It can be done. But now you know that you've got an issue, and that you're probably not going to be able just to go out there necessarily without doing a little extra work and just growing in that upper surface, just grow your green beans. But you didn't know that before, but now you do. So what do you have to do for this? Well, that depends. There's some options, but that depends. You can do a little bit more research, and then you can say, well, I'm going to have to do this and this, because this is really what I want to do with this soil. This is something where you could perhaps consider, maybe you're going to do raised beds. Maybe it's not going to be that much space, and you're going to say, I'm going to bring in my own soil. I'm going to bring in a better soil. or maybe because it's a small enough area, you're only doing an eighth of an acre garden plot. You're going to say, well, I can bring in amendments and I can actually get that pH because it's not that much. It's going to cost me $1,000, and I know I can afford that because I'm going to be able to. I'm doing a community garden, or I'm doing a farmers whatever they call roadside stall kind of stuff. I'm going to easily make that back. So I just gonna have to put that investment in it. But you know what you've got, you know where you're starting with, and you know what? What are you gonna do when you buy it? You decide to buy it anyways. You're gonna still run a soil test on exactly what you have, because this is generally probably what it is. But you might be surprised. Maybe where you are, maybe it's 5.8, maybe it's 6.0, maybe something's already been done. Maybe you're in a slightly different. Because remember, it's not site specific. But now we have some information that we didn't have before. Now we at least know what we're probably looking at. Okay. So if you came thinking, man, I'm going to move to Georgia, I'm going to move here, I'm going to buy this property, I'm going to grow green beans. Well, yep, you can still do that, but there's going to have to be at least one more intermediate step before those green beans are going to grow. Now you know that. So you've done some work without actually leaving the comfort of your seat, and now you have more information and you know what you may or may not have to do in this case. So we like that. We want to keep that. Let's go back up. Again, I keep losing my spot here. Too many, and I can add this to my shopping cart. Okay, so I don't want to call it anything, but I'm going to do that now. There is a whole bunch of other stuff here I want to show you. I want to go. I can go soil properties and qualities. We can. There's if I close this one out, for instance, I can do soil health, and you can look at available water capacity. You can look at organic matter. You can look at bulk density. Here's a pH again. You can even look at surface texture. There's everything that you possibly could want to know is right there, except to tell you how to do everything. All the information is there. It's just not going to tell you this is what you got to do to fix it. That's on you, right? So like I said, that's on the person. I can close this up. I'm just going to show you real quick. So physical properties. See, some of these things are going to be reduced. Now, if you're in an area where you really you're going to irrigate all these things, this available water capacity is going to be super important. It's going to be important because it's going to tell you how much water can the soil hold. You could actually say, well, I'm in a dry environment. Now I know Georgia's not a dry environment, but I'm in a drier environment. I need to irrigate. But water's not cheap. I want to know how much I'm going to have to put on. First, you got to figure out what's the climate going to give you. Let's just say it gives you minimal. So we're not even going to we're going to discount. If you live in where I do, you never count on the climate, because it's never going to rain, it seems like. So everything's irrigated. So you need to know how much water can my soil hold. And maybe you're only looking at a root zone because you're going to grow green beans. 0 to 50 centimeters, that's 20 inches. That's plenty. You're not going to ever worry about what's below that. You just want to irrigate 20 inches. So how much water can be stored in that 20 inches? And then what's the rate of water that I'm putting on? You got drip irrigation, or you got some system that's putting on a certain amount of water in a certain amount of time. You can now figure that out. Will you have to tweak it? Of course you will. But now you have a place to start. Now, if you're growing green beans or you're growing corn, two different things. They're going to use different amounts of water. There's going to use different amounts of water in their growing cycle too. But you now know how much you're putting on, how much can be stored. And if you can figure out by, say, life stage of your crop, how much it's probably going to use, and that information is actually available, then you're not wasting water. And of course, maybe it doesn't make a difference if you're going out and you're watering things with a hose because you don't care. But what if you were doing a 1 acre garden or a 2 acre garden? Then it becomes there's a little bit more money that you don't want to waste. That might be $200 a month of water that theoretically is just going past your root zone, and you're watering stuff that's not getting used. So there's all kinds of stuff in there that you can look at. If you wanted to know how much clay you have, how much sand you have, all that information is actually all in here under these soil properties and qualities, soil physical properties. Okay. So if you want to know how water moves through the soil, now, again, some people are like, I don't really care about any of this stuff, but I'm just showing it. I only want to know whether I can grow green beans. That's fine. It'll show you that. But if you need to know more, and as you understand more about soils, then it gives you more information to make even more informed decisions. And that's kind of like, again, I'm showing you a ton of stuff here. And it's like, wow, there's all kinds of information in there. And we're not going to try to give an exhaustive thing, because really the tool is just to show you how to move around in it. You can kind of see how I did it. We just picked a random spot and we just kind of decided we want to look at this area. You could put in an address. You want to look at your own property, look at your own property and your neighbor's property. Just put in your address and it'll come up with the same thing. But the final thing is we can come over here and to do soil reports. And this again kind of duplicates it. If you wanted to look at, you got your land classifications again. If you want to know, hey, well, I'm going to have to put an outhouse out there. Well, that's the sanitary facilities. Here's your chemical properties. And you can see this is just a chemical properties report. Now, if we view this one, for instance, it's going to give you a whole bunch of stuff. I'll show you this on purpose. This is why I like to actually run reports, because they give you a lot more information. So
Right.
we just looked at we were over here on the pH. Where is the pH? I think it's farther over. I don't even see it. But you can see here, this now gives you the depth of the soil, the different layers. It gives you cation exchange capacity in the upper 6 inches. That's a measure of fertility. Okay, that's a measure of fertility. Now here's the pH right here. Here it gives you the range of pH. This is what I'm telling you. See, it actually, you could actually be as high as 6.5. That's a pretty wide range. 4.5 would be really hard to grow green beans. 6.5, you'd be able to do that without doing any modification. So it gave you the state what it thought it was probably, but you don't really know. The surface might be better than that. Calcium carbonate, you would have no problems with that. And again, you might look at salinity, but I wouldn't expect any of those to be a problem in the East anywhere. Very, very unlikely to have this. You just don't have a problem with it. So that's pretty typical. The only really interesting thing would be the range of pH here. And the fact is that you've got a little bit of fertility, and you can see that the higher the number, the better. And the number goes down. What we don't know, one thing I didn't show you, and I'll do that in just a second, is that you can actually add that to your shopping cart too. See, if you love it, you can add as much stuff as you want to it. I can close this out again. And I can close this out again. And I could do the same thing with physical properties, whatever I want. Let me have a look over here in this, what's called area of interest inventory. Now, this is one thing that's actually worth looking at. So if you don't know anything about these soils, we've just been looking at characteristics, but if you want to know a little bit more about the soils themselves, I'm not sure why I keep hitting the wrong thing there. Let's go back to, we don't need that one in Spanish, but they do actually have that one in Spanish. You can look at this non-technical component description. You can just go through here and say, what does that actually mean? Let's have a look at that. Okay, we can't do it. If it says it can't do it, then there's some things will run that way. It's like there just isn't the data. But let's look at map unit description. That one hopefully will be able to run. Okay, this gives you a lot of information about the soils themselves. So first of all, it tells you, where you are, Banks and Stevens County, and then it goes by map unit. So you can see it gives you some information, the elevation there, gives you the mean annual precipitation. It says you get 44 to 60 inches of rain here. It gives you the mean annual air temperature, 59 to 64. It gives you the frost-free period. Those are all interesting things. 190 to 230 days. That's not bad. That's quite a bit of frost-free time there. That again, if you're a gardener, that might have some bearing. If you wanted to put up if you were interested in a hoop house, let's just say a high tunnel, that you might say, well, you know what? I could actually extend my growing season. And based on some of the information that you pull out of this, you might also say this would be a great place to actually do this, because the high tunnel, maybe I can add 12 inches of good material on top of this soil. And now I have an effective, I'm using the natural land, but I'm adding just enough that I'm allowed to do. And I'm still using natural soil, but I'm actually supplementing the upper where most of my roots are going to be with a material of my choice, or a soil of my choice. You see that could be a reason for somebody to use a high tunnel, which again, I'd say talk to NRCS about that, because I know a lot of people are doing it. It tells you again a little bit about, it says estimates are based on observations, descriptions, and transects. So it keeps trying to tell you that you got to do your due diligence and you got to be on site yourself. You can't expect all the work to be done for you because they can't. If you wanted to know, what this thing looks like, it's on hills. So the whole area is hills. It tells you again, here's that parent material term I mentioned. Everything is weathered in place. So the soils are from what's underneath it. And then here's a profile of this particular soil: sandy clay loam, clay, sandy clay loam, and then somewhere down there you have sandy loam. So it looks to me like once you get through this heavy clay layer, you get into a layer that's got less clay. That might be relevant because you might say, what if I lost 15 inches of soil? Well, then you might have that sandy loam closer to the surface. Is that good or bad? It's just what it is. It's just knowledge is all it is. It just tells you something. Because remember, with these soils were called severely eroded. So you might find some area might not have the sandy clay loam. If it's severely eroded, it might have lost 6 inches or so of soil, and you might actually be down into what you have clay at the surface. You probably wouldn't want that. That would be even more challenging, especially if that clay is 24 inches thick. That's 2 feet of clay. That would be really hard to grow something in. So it gives you this information because it's if you know what you're looking at. You know that it's on hills. It's probably not subject to flooding. That's another thing I wanted to mention. A lot of times the best farmland or the best growing land is land that's subject to flooding. So got to do your due diligence. Some places don't. Some places will not tell you, this isn't protected by a levee. We got this creek over here and it floods every so often. And it's like, is there a levee? No. Okay, well, that might be important. That might be why it's so cheap. So always check to see whether or not you're in a floodplain and whether or not there's any protection and how big that water source is, because that could ruin all your plants. A lot of places will not let you build a house on a floodplain without letting you know that. But if there was a house that was already there, an old house, let's just say, was already there, that might have been prior to. And if it's sitting on a little bit of the hill, then you know that was probably deliberate. Either they pushed that dirt up there and built the hill on top because they knew, or there was a fortuitous hill that they were able to build on. But anyway, I just say be very careful about flooding in some of these places. Whenever you're looking for any kind of property, make sure that's one of the very first things you do. Am I in a floodplain? What kind of a floodplain? Is it a 100-year floodplain? If it's a 100-year, you might be safe. You're taking everything's a chance in life. But if it's a 20-year floodplain, there's probably going to be restrictions on building there. But you may, and again, I saw this as recently as 2 months ago here in California. I saw a levee totally destroyed because we've had, this has been a good year, totally destroyed. And the farmland, I can see there was asparagus or broccoli or whatever it was, broccoli, I think, coming through in some spots, but the sediment was all across a good portion of that field because the levee was gone. And it's just, so, I mean, if you're relying on, say, something, and you're relying on a levee to support you, or you're relying on it not flooding, I should say, then make sure it ain't going to flood, or make sure you got that protection there. So that's probably the most important thing I can say about looking at property. And you can tell, you can't tell if it's in a flood. You can't tell what it's been classified, but you can tell if you're in a floodplain or not. If it says hills, you're not in a floodplain, right? You might have the little creeks going through here and there at the base, but don't have to worry about it. But if you're in a flat area, and you got all those creeks and stuff that we saw there, then there's a good chance that some of those are going to flood. Okay, so it just kind of gives you a whole bunch of information down through here. You get, like I said, you get the profile, there's the layers, and it tells you some more. The slope 6 to 10%, depth to a restrictive feature. That could be a water table, that could be bedrock, more than 80 inches. Okay, well, that's taller than me by a long shot. Nothing to worry about through there. Drainage class, well drained. It gives you all kinds of information. See, frequency of flooding, none. So it's never going to flood. So that's because it's up on the side of a hill. And then available water supply tells you, so in 60 inches, it can store about 8.4 inches of water. That's a lot of water. So there's a whole bunch of other stuff in through there that may or may not be interesting. It's even got an ecological site for people that want to know that. And the acidic upland forest, that was the natural ecological site. That was what was there originally. It was upland, what they call an upland forest. And it's called moist because you're getting, 60 inches of rain a year. Anyways, so I wanted to show you that because that's, and again, I always lose this thing. I wanted to show you that because that's a lot of general information. We can say, let's add that to our shopping cart as well. You could do this all day long with as many things as you wanted and as much stuff as actually as is in there. There is a ton of stuff. There is absolutely a ton of stuff. I showed you the building site developments. You know, if you wanted to put in a toilet, let's just do one more. I'll go down to sanitary facilities and let's just do, where do you go? I don't really like operating off the laptop. The laptop is usually closed. I don't know if you can hear that, but somebody's got a car horn going on outside.
No, actually,
So,
I could not. I didn't
oh,
hear it
that's
at
good.
all.
I'm glad you can't. I hope it's not my car, but it's gone on several times. If it's my car, someone's probably got it already, so that's all right. So let's do a sewage disposal. Let's just say we're interested in that. And
Right.
I just want to show you how this works. This goes back to building. We're going to view the soil report. We want to get rid of our waste.
And we can look here to determine whether or not a property takes, if it's actually connected to septic or
No, you can't do
the
that.
local.
No,
Oh,
no, that one actually wouldn't work. I may have run
okay.
into a glitch here. Let's wait a second and see. There we go. Oops. Didn't mean to download anything. I don't know why I'm doing that. It's still loading up. Now, sometimes you get this. Hopefully it's not being too fussy. But while we're waiting for it to do what it probably is not going to do because it wants to, it's probably the car horn outside. It just decided it didn't like that. Here we go. So it'll show you again. And remember, we're not getting the colored pictures up there because we're into reports. We're not
All
actually
right.
looking at suitabilities and limitations. We could actually do that and get that because you can see this is a rating class. So up there on that Madison clay, that severely eroded stuff, it tells us if we want to do a septic tank absorption field, somewhat limited. Septic tank absorption field, okay? Somewhat limited. Why? Because it's too much clay in it. We can't actually perk fast enough. That's going to be a problem.
Mhm.
What if we say, well, doggone it, what about a sewage lagoon? Very limited. You can't put a sewage lagoon on a slope, right? Well, that's kind of obvious now. But
Right.
again, if we were looking to build a house and we didn't have sewer and we wanted to say, well, what can we put in there? We know that we're going to have a bit of a challenge. So slow water movement means that there's probably something in the county where they say, hey, if you're going to do a sewage lagoon, you got to build it up above, the slope. You can't, or you got to build it down below. You got to transport your water. Or if you're going to do absorption field, you're going to probably have to bring in material and you're going to have a mound absorption field. In other words, you're going to have to make your own soil that's actually that moves effluent liquid quick enough. You can't use the natural soil. So these are all things that I'm just thinking if I was to buy there, I would be thinking, what am I going to do with this property? And here's
Absolutely.
some of the things that I need to know about. So it's all great. It's like
Absolutely.
if you just look at say, it looks beautiful. It's all green. I come from a brown area. This is just gorgeous. And you said the price is only what? Oh my gosh. I got that in my bank account right now. I'll have so and so transfer it to you. Well, if you knew what you wanted to do with it, and you just looked at without knowing what's underneath the hood, underneath the surface, then you might end up being disappointed or surprised or worse, horrified. That it was not really what you bargained for, and that looks weren't the looks. It looked good, but it wasn't what you expected. But all the information is right through here, and you can see I just we've jumped all over the place, but hopefully it's given you enough. Hopefully that's Deborah, this is kind of what you were hoping to get out of that. That people can
Absolutely.
actually see it.
Absolutely.
I'll add this last thing to the shopping cart, and then I'll show you this last part here. So you can actually there's another tab up here at the top, download soils
Mhm.
data. You can explore that if you want. That's actually if you want to use this data. That's not for what we're doing. That's actually if you want to use this data in like a GIS or something like that. It's
All
more for
right.
people who are doing research or whatever. But let's come
All
over here
right.
to our shopping cart free thing. So what it's going to do is going to take all that information and it's going to actually add it all up, and we can see over here what it's done. Here's what it's done. It's got all these things in here, And there's some things that we can click off. If you don't care how soil surveys are made, for instance, you could, you could click off of that one. But eventually when it gets it, you're going to click check out. And now there's going to be two methods, get it now or download it later. I'll try get it now. We'll see what happens.
All right.
Sometimes you got to put in your email address, and they'll send you a link, and the link will give you a whole report. But if I get it now, then you'll get a chance to actually see what it actually looks like. Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
So this is what it actually produces. And this is, if you have a way to print this, or even if you don't print it, you can save it. It'll just like this. It comes up, and you could have put your own name in there, for Deborah Elias or whatever, or my dream property. You can do whatever you want. It shows you it shows you what we selected, and then it gives you information in here. Here's your table of contents, and you can kind of see everything we chose is actually in there. Here's your soil map. Yeah, it's beautiful. Here's your soil map. Here's the legend that we could pull out. Here's the map unit, the actual information. The descriptions that we looked at are actually in here. There's some of the stuff we looked at. I showed you that already. We added it. Remember, we added all these things to it. So we have all this information. And then we come down here to suitabilities and limitation. Remember, we looked at dwellings with basements. It just tells you here all the information about that we ignored. All the description of the rating is actually in here. It tells you it's an engineering rating, and it tells you exactly what they're looking at and how they rated it. There's our stuff. There's our ratings. There's a legend below it, and then there's the actual table that actually goes with that. It tells you why it's limited, or if it's not limited. And you remember the one had slope problems down through here. So you can kind of see, we just keep going through that. Here's the second one, farmland classification, same thing. Gives you the ratings and the soil. Here's our pH. We did that one. It tells you everything on it, gives you the legend. It gives you the actual table that goes with it. And then tells you how it did it. Remember, we had to put in a slope. I had to put in a depth on that one. And then we decided to look at sewage disposal. That's a report. So here's our sewage, can't say. And they're only giving the choice in this case of septic tank absorption fields and sewage lagoons.
All right.
Right.
And
then we did. Go on. Sorry. I
can wait. Forgive me.
No. I think this was the last one we did. This one that had the chemical soil properties. So you can kind of see we've where are you? I always want to go the wrong direction with that.
Well, since you mentioned chemical soil property, and we're right here at the references, I just had a thought in terms of, does the web tool survey indicate whether or not the soil has been exposed to any form of oil or gas?
No, we wouldn't be able to do that either. That's again another perfect reason why you'll need to do your own on-site
gotcha.
Observations
and ask questions. Gotcha. Well, thank you so much, Peter. This has been a delight. You have educated us on soil and how to go about looking for land within the United States of America. So we're always grateful for you. Thank you for your passion, and thank you for your willingness to educate us.
It was my pleasure. Thank you for your attention.
You're so very welcome. And I'll be listing all of Peter's contact information, with your permission, of course.
Of course.
On our social media platforms and on our website. So till we meet again.